In this episode, we will discuss treating the wound.
But treating an open wound can be very, very painful.
Many of you while watching might feel uncomfortable or even upset with what you hear.
But we invite you to reflect on 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and seek my face, I will hear them from heaven and heal their land, heal their wound.
It's our prayer that we will humble ourselves to allow God to heal the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Thanks for watching. God bless. Talking about the ugly past of the church, while uncomfortable, does not compare to the pain, divide, and frustration that often ensues when talking about the problems we're having today with race relations. But despite the pain, we must talk about it. We must treat the wound.
In society, we really are starting to wrestle with the effects of racism on our country. The fact that our country is built on the premise of white supremacy. I mean, that is the foundation of this country. And I think that it's beautiful that we are finally getting to a place where we're actually deciding to talk about it. But I don't necessarily see that as intentionally done in our church.
It's an interesting topic, and it's one that people don't always want to talk about. And one thing I think why it's still an issue is because people can sometimes be afraid of change, and they can be afraid of backlash. It's something people don't want to talk about because, okay, that was in the past, we're not like that anymore, but we're not talking about it. And they'd be like, well, if we talk about it, maybe there'll be backlash. Maybe, we'll have to change certain things. And people aren't always comfortable with change.
A lot of the time, especially from my point of view, coming from, predominantly white culture, it's not even talked about, I didn't even realize it was an issue. And that's a huge problem.
Because these types of issues exist in the church, it's hard for the church to affect change in the world.
There is a disconnect here, and there is a divide, and we happen to be in the church. Mm-hmm. So that's the instance when I realized that, hey, this could be a church issue too. Church people they're not susceptible. They're not set back, in a cattle of 1,000 hills, watching everything else unfold. And I began to think then, wow, Lord, we are just as accountable for these issues as secular people are.
I think the topic of racial divide has escalated over the past 5 years or so, primarily because this is another example of how the wider culture impacts internal church culture. It is something that you cannot separate, you cannot get away from.
There are people who do want to actively come together, but at the same time, when a dialogue is presented, you'll see if you look, at the population, you're going to look at a lot of African Americans. Unfortunately, or just black people in general, you're not going to see very many whites.
Many white people are unclear on what the safe territory is, and whether we have a right to contribute even to the good that could come. And so there's kind of like this month of kind of awkward tension of being a white guy.
This is a tricky topic, but let's start from the beginning. What exactly is systemic racism?
Systemic racism is the overarching system of beliefs, the process that almost operates both with the help of individuals and almost beyond individuals. It's permeated into our laws and our practices, our culture. It's just the idea that promotes the belief that whiteness, white beliefs, white thoughts, and white habits, white skin is superior to other different cultures and people. When you think about what for many years has been deemed appropriate within Adventism when it comes to music and expression and worship, those things mirror very much what is considered to be appropriate or just the way of doing things in Europe.
Some of you may be watching this and thinking, I don't have a prejudice towards black music. It's just not my preference. But the ideology that black music, black worship, is inferior or inappropriate for the Christian experience is pretty prevalent through the Adventist Church.
In those churches that have gone to a more black style of worship, they often get called pejorative names in Pentecostal and condemned.
Unfortunately, we had a couple of issues. There's an app called Yik Yak that was used a couple of years ago, and there was a pastor from, I believe, Oakwood, who came and spoke, and it was a great message about bringing people together. And instead of these students, celebrating that fact, the unity there, instead they decided to go on Yik Yak and call this man and the service of the Black Christian Union that night obscene names that should never be used.
Part of the distrust currently is the difference in worship styles.
When it comes to black worship experience, there seems to be a huge disconnect with the white community. Why might that be?
What I'm finding has more to do with the purpose behind it, and the place from which we come in society. So no matter what my convictions are, I'm still a white man, and I'm going to receive benefits and privileges based on that my black brothers and sisters don't have. And so when I approach worship, I'm coming from a place of security and of privilege, whether I like it or not, and I'm more than likely going to also portray God in that way. He's this magnificent God. So worship is a very safe, secure place, and we'll sing our songs, and God's great. He's involved in our lives. He's certainly involved in black and white lives. But when black Americans, black American Adventists come to worship, the purpose is different, simply based on color of skin. But it's this American context. Our very laws were based on race, that the existence among blacks and whites was different, that the Constitution actually said that, in essence, that black Americans weren't fully human. And as a result, when blacks, whether they are Adventist or Christian, come to worship, they're celebrating this God who gives them hope, who's going to get us over. And we are praising God for what He has given us in Jesus Christ. He's given us our identity, that we're saved children of God, but we're also protesting. They might sing the same Chris Tomlin white praise and worship song, a white and a black, but a black can also bring into that praise protest of the injustice that's in the world. And so the purpose I see is very different among blacks and whites.
Aside from the tendency to delegitimize the black worship experience, what other issues are we facing in the SDA Church?
We are seeing now this conversation of representation is really growing in America, where we're kind of sitting back and saying, black and brown people make up this amount of the American population, but that number is disproportionate to the way that they make up leadership in our country. And I think we see that same thing represented in the Adventist Church, whether minorities are missing in certain key leadership positions, or maybe they've never been in those leadership positions. Whatever the case may be, I think that we are seeing the same things that are happening in our environment are actually happening in our church as well.
We see this when it comes to the allocation of resources. We see this when it comes to individuals participating in the phenomenon called white flight, which was studied and researched predominantly during the mid-1960s into the early 80s, to where when a certain amount of darker members began attending an Adventist church that was predominantly white, you see a phenomenon take place where the white members will then leave the church, just completely migrate away from that church and build another church that is once again predominantly white. This is still a part of our society, it's still a part of our denomination.
So we see that the way that our individual members and individual membership interact with each other is evident that there is a race problem in the Adventist Church of North America. I mean, the fact that on Sabbath morning we are incredibly segregated is telling.
Lack of diverse leadership, white flight, segregated churches, the tendency to treat regional conferences, black worship, and black culture as inferior to the Adventist Church. We could spend hours unpacking each issue. However, probably one of the biggest problems we're facing is many white people's inability to see and resonate with these issues.
A very inflammatory word for white people is the word privilege.
First and foremost, white people feel like wait a second, are you saying that I did something? And honestly, I think that there are a very large majority of Christian white people that feel like I didn't do anything wrong. You know, I haven't done anything, any injustice. I have lots of black friends, you know, I have lots of multicultural friends, you know, and I'm not doing anything to anybody. Like, I don't know why I'm being made to feel like I've done something wrong to somebody when I haven't done anything wrong.
One of the problems that we face when we talk about white privilege is that a lot of white people feel like guilt is being thrust on them for something.
As soon as I say, you know what, some of what you're enjoying is privilege. Now what Phil implicitly feels is you're saying I haven't worked hard. I don't deserve anything.
And they look at what they're doing, they say, I'm not doing anything wrong. I didn't hurt anybody. I didn't throw any stereotypes around or use any racial epithets. What are they talking about when they say white privilege? And the fact is, white privilege is a sort of invisible thing from this side. When we look at the way we're treated, let's say by other people in a store, or by policemen, or by whoever it is, we evaluate this treatment and we say, that's just normal. That's the way you're supposed to treat people, okay? So that I expect that the cashier in the supermarket is going to be reasonably polite to me and ring up my sale and tell me to have a nice day. I expect that the policeman is, when he stops me, going to write a ticket without saying anything nasty about me, without doing anything dangerous, without shooting me. I expect just to be treated normally. And the truth is, the way I'm treated is normal, and that's the point. White privilege is not about people doing something wrong. It's about other people not being treated right. It's the deficit in the way black people, Hispanic people, other people are treated. And we can't really experience it because obviously I've never had a black skin, never had a Spanish accent, never lived in a female body. I've never had any experience except the one that I've got. And so I never perceive somebody treating me unfairly. I'd have to be in that experience to know it.
And it happens. If I get pulled over by a policeman, all I have to do is be polite and show my driver's license and joke around, and everything's fine. That is my world. That's my norm. And so it's difficult for me as a white person to understand that that is not the norm for the entire world. I just assume that to be true for everybody.
And the truth is, the kind of treatment I get as a white person is nothing I need to be ashamed of. I haven't done anything wrong. And the person who is interacting with me hasn't done anything wrong either. We're not breaking any laws or hurting anybody or doing anything immoral. The problem is other people aren't treated this way.
And as I begin to have conversations with my friends with people of color, I realize that when they get pulled over by a police, it's an entire different perspective. When they go to a hotel to check in, when they go to many other situations, the treatment is entirely different. And until I have those conversations with my friends, people of color, I don't get it. And a lot of my friends who are white have never had those conversations, so a lot of this stuff just kind of goes right over their heads, and they don't get it. You know, what is this thing? You know, why can't we all get along? Why are black people so racist? Why do they keep bringing up slavery when it's not an issue for me? Well, it is an issue because of white privilege.
The truth is, if you want to put it this way, there is absolutely nothing at all wrong with white privilege, except the fact that it isn't everybody privilege, and there's the problem.
White privilege makes it easier to not see the racial problems the church faces, because it's not happening to you. That being said, it does seem that more and more people are becoming aware of the festering wound of our church.
We've seen an escalation of this conversation, which has led to an escalation of the conversation within our church. As the youth movement of today, which is trying to break down many of the walls that have sustained institutions for decades in the United States of America. That movement has started to chip away at those walls. I mean, they have their ice picks out, man, and they are trying to tear down some of these breaches in between people. And that is also true of the youth movement within the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the North American division.
More and more people are calling it out.
People think, oh, because I'm not being racist means that I'm all good, but in reality, like, we're creating this environment that just pushes a group outside of the bubble and then says, well, because we're not doing that anymore, like, everything's good, but in reality, like, they're still outside the bubble. And it's just so interesting to me that, like, not only we don't talk about it, that it's an issue, but when we do talk about it as an issue, we talk about it almost as like a secondary issue to other unity topics. And I think that makes zero sense.
More and more people are standing up with the black community, demanding change. Are you?
Because at this point, we're kind of saying like, hey, this is an issue, fix that, and then we turn our backs and like, they'll probably fix it. And in reality, like, no, we'll just, everyone who's not dealing with the issue will just be like, yeah, we'll fix that. All right, let's go back to normal. There, nothing's gonna happen.
And what happens is we try to cover up the culture change and the change that has to happen in people by putting forth legislation and like putting forth like events.
Yes, I firmly believe that a lot of the times, majority of the times, the churches mostly focus on saving face.
Let's have some accountability. Let's treat this as a huge issue because it is a huge issue. And until we treat it and see it as a huge issue, it will continue to be ignored.
Join us next week when we interview Dr. Carlton Bird and other Oakwood professors and students about some of the solutions in healing this wound.
Come when you are able to haystack out my table.